So today I'm going to tell you about the king, King Ahab. Now, King Ahab, remembers, a wicked king. He's married to Jezebel. He hates God. He doesn't like God at all. And he's in control of the whole country. And he's also a very greedy king. And one day he was out walking and he notices from his palace walls a lovely garden. And he says, I would love that garden. He was coveting after it. And that's one of the commandments, the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet. Coveting is simply seeing something and you want it for yourself. God says don't do that. If you need something, get it. But if you don't need it, don't long for it. And the king had so many gardens. And this was a vineyard. It was owned by a man called Naboth. It says in the Bible, Naboth had a little small garden and the king wanted it. And the king approached him and said, Naboth, please give me your garden. I want it for myself. It's a vineyard, but I want to make it into a garden of herbs. And Naboth said, no, it belonged to my father and his father before that, and we want to keep it within his family. And the king Ahab said, I'll give you money for it. I'll buy you another vineyard. I want this vineyard. And Naboth said, no, king, with all due respect, I don't want to sell it. I want to keep it, and your money for me is not so important. The king begins to cry. And the king goes home and he lies down on his sofa and he starts to cry. And he wept because he really wanted something and he couldn't get it. You like that? When you want something and your mum says, no, you can't have it, and you start to cry? That's wrong. That's wrong. Your mum always knows best. And sometimes children, when they can't get their own way, they cry. They just cry. Like the king. And the queen came up to him and said to the king, why are you crying? What's wrong? He said, Naboth won't give me his garden. I want his garden, and he won't give me his garden. What? She said, you're the king. Be a man. If you want anything, you have the power to take it, and you don't even need to pay him. He said, I offered him money. I offered to buy him another garden, and he still won't sell it to me. And the queen says, I'll teach Naboth what to do. Do you know what the queen done? The queen went and arranged for more than two people, to accuse Naboth of speaking against the king and blaspheming God. That meant if he was accused of that, he could be stoned to death. And these two men, they saw Naboth, and before all the other people, before the elders, they said, we heard you speaking against God, and we heard you speaking against the king. Naboth said, I never. I love the king and I love God. We heard you. And all the elders believed these two men, and Naboth was taken out and he was stoned to death. That was terrible. Terrible. But that's exactly what happened. He was stoned to death, accused of the wrong. Why? Because a selfish king wanted his garden. And he refused to sell it, and the queen set up a plan to have the man put to death. But the Bible says, be sure your sin will find you out. And whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. God spoke to Elijah. Elijah was a prophet, and God spoke to the prophets and gave them a message. And God spoke to Elijah, the prophet of God, and said, go to the king. The king hated Elijah. And Elijah was fearless. He was bold, and he went to the king and said, have you stolen? Have you taken? Have you killed? And the king says to himself, how did he know that? God knows everything. The Bible says the eyes of God go to and fro throughout the whole earth. God sees everything, he hears everything, and he knows everything. You can never hide anything from God. Remember that. God sees everything. And Elijah says to the king, because you have done this terrible crime, you've had an innocent man killed, an innocent man put to death, his family's all distraught. He said, the same way he died, you are also going to die. And your wife, the queen, that whenever Naboth died, the dogs would come and lick his sores, lick his blood. And he said, the same way he died, your wife Jezebel is going to die the same way. And that's exactly what happened. Because one day Jezebel was up the window, up high in the building, looking out the window, and she was pushed out the window and she died, and the dogs came and ate up her body. It sounds like a terrible thing, but you can read that in the Bible. And it taught us exactly the way Jezebel, the wicked queen, lived, is exactly the way she died. What she wanted for Naboth, his death, is the way she died herself. And remember, boys and girls, never to think bad, or never to think evil, and never do evil. And Elijah went back to Elisha, and together they kept working and serving for 10 years until something happened. Do you want to know what it was? Wait till the next series.